Berlin police killed Abdul Balout, the suspect in the deadly attack near the city's Pride celebrations, after a manhunt that followed the vehicle strike and a later confrontation in a suburb. Germany's Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt called the case a likely Islamist terror attack. Reuters, NPR, AP, Al Jazeera, and NBC all anchor the same core record: the suspect's identity, the public safety response, and the police account of how the search ended. The practical question now is whether prosecutors or interior officials publish a dated case file clarifying motive, accomplices, security failures, and charges that would have followed. The stakes are Berlin event security, immigrant community protection, and terrorism classification. Viewers should watch the next police briefing, prosecutor statement, casualty update, and court-linked investigative record. Those documents decide whether this remains a closed manhunt or becomes a wider security inquiry affecting public events across Germany. A later Berlin record should name the office responsible, the evidence reviewed, and any public event security change. If officials release nothing else, the strongest public position remains the multi-source police timeline already on record. The dated checkpoint for Story 1 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 1 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers. Nvidia is reportedly discussing a guarantee of as much as $250 billion in financing tied to OpenAI data center expansion. Reuters, Bloomberg, CNBC TV 18, and India Times all trace the claim to market reports citing the Wall Street Journal. The story matters because the financing would connect AI chip supply, cloud capacity, investor risk, and US-China technology policy in one unusually large corporate infrastructure bet. What is still missing is a signed agreement, company filing, named lender list, and clear explanation of whether Nvidia is guaranteeing debt, equipment purchases, or future revenue. The next concrete records are Nvidia and OpenAI statements, securities filings, bank disclosures, and market reaction after investors can see terms. Until those appear, the safe reading is that talks are reported by multiple outlets, while financial structure remains unconfirmed. A real filing would show who carries the risk. A later financing record should name the guarantor, the borrower, the data center assets, and the repayment trigger. That is the difference between a headline-sized negotiation and a commitment investors can price. The dated checkpoint for Story 2 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 2 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. Andy Burnham, identified in today's reports as Britain's new Prime Minister, said he would be prepared to disagree publicly with Donald Trump when necessary. CNBC carried the original interview frame, while The Guardian, The Financial Times, and The Express Tribune described the same early diplomacy test. Burnham also described their first phone call as constructive, which makes the story about governing style rather than a single insult. The useful question is whether the rhetoric becomes policy. Viewers should watch for a Downing Street readout, parliamentary statement, foreign policy speech, trade decision, or security decision showing how the new government handles Washington. A formal document matters more than the interview line. It can show whether Britain is changing position, preserving continuity, or setting expectations for more public disagreement with Trump. The first cabinet paper or parliamentary exchange will show whether this is personal diplomacy, alliance management, or a concrete policy turn. That record also tells viewers which ministries own the next decision. The dated checkpoint for Story 3 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 3 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 3 Part 3 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and Seattle police are searching for two men who parachuted from the Space Needle after an unauthorized jump from one of the city's most visible landmarks. USA Today, the New York Times, AP, and the Seattle Times all describe the investigation as unresolved. The story is public safety news rather than stunt trivia because police still need to identify the jumpers, determine how they access the structure, and decide whether charges follow. It also raises a practical security question for the operator and nearby crowds. The next useful record is a police incident update, surveillance description, citation, arrest report, or Space Needle statement explaining what failed. Until then, viewers should treat the event as an active local investigation with unanswered access and safety questions. The case changes when names, charges, or new access rules appear. A later city record should explain whether the jump involved trespass, aviation rules, emergency response costs, or new landmark security procedures. That is why the police update, not the viral image, is the checkpoint. The dated checkpoint for Story 4 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 4 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 4 Part 3 should identify the A federal appellate ruling left the injunction against Trump's voter list order in place. The Washington Post, AP, Jacksonville Journal-Courier, and Palestine Herald reports all point to the same legal checkpoint. The decision keeps the fight centered on federal authority, state election records, privacy limits, and the practical burden on election offices. What matters next is whether the administration seeks emergency relief, rewrites the order, or returns to the lower court with a narrower plan. Viewers should watch the docket for a stay request, revised government filing, Supreme Court petition, or state election office response explaining what data would be shared. Those records decide whether the injunction remains a durable block. They also show whether voterless policy moves through courts or administrative pressure. A later court entry should name the panel, the deadline, the requested remedy, and the state records affected. That filing is the way viewers can separate campaign language from enforceable election administration. The dated checkpoint for Story 5 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 5 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 5 Part 3 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers. Trump's Section 301 tariff program is facing court challenges from small businesses and trade groups. Courthouse News, Bloomberg, The Business Times, and Qatar Tribune describe lawsuits over the reach of the administration's tariff authority. The central issue is legal, not only economic. Plaintiffs want courts to decide whether the government used the right statute, process, and justification for broad import costs. The stakes reach importers, retailers, manufacturers, and consumers because a court order could pause, narrow, or validate the tariff structure. The next records to watch are docket entries, briefing schedules, government responses, preliminary injunction rulings, and customs guidance that changes collection at the border. Until a judge acts, companies still have to plan around policy uncertainty. A customs bulletin would be the practical turning point for affected shipments. A later order should identify the tariff lines, the legal authority, and whether collections continue during appeal. That is the record importers need before changing contracts or prices. The dated checkpoint for Story 6 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 6 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 6 Part 3 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers. Police in Morgan Hill, California, are investigating a shooting at a large party that killed one person and injured several others. CBS News, New York Post, Times Now, and ABC7 Bay Area all describe a major local scene with witnesses still important to the investigation. The urgent facts are who organized the gathering, how many shooters were involved, whether police have identified suspects, and whether the injury count changes as hospitals update conditions. The public safety stakes are immediate for families, witnesses, and nearby residents. Investigators may need video tips and a timeline before arrests are possible. Viewers should watch for a police press release, victim identification, warrant, arrest affidavit, and district attorney's statement. Those records show whether the case moves from scene response to charges. A later police record should state whether the party was permitted, how officers found the victims, and what evidence remains missing. That update is the practical checkpoint for residents and families. The dated checkpoint for Story 7 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 7 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 7 Part 3 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. Reports on Red Sea, Strait of Hormuz, and Caspian Sea risks show how the Iran conflict can spread through maritime routes even when the United States forgoes direct strikes. Reuters, Al Jazeera, NBC, and The Washington Post describe a conflict picture where shipping lanes, energy markets, and regional security decisions are linked. The practical question is which route faces verified disruption, which government or armed group is responsible, and whether insurers, navies, or port authorities change guidance. Viewers should watch shipping advisories, naval statements, oil market disclosures, and satellite or field reports tied to named locations. Those records matter because broad war language can move markets. Route-specific advisories and verified attacks change the real risk for trade. The next concrete checkpoint is a named maritime warning or confirmed field report. A later maritime notice should name the route, ship class, risk level, and authority issuing the warning. That is the record traders and crews can act on. The dated checkpoint for Story 8 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 8 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 8 Part 3 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. Romania says its military shot down a third drone and blames Russia. Politico, Al Jazeera, Armen Press, and regional reports describe the incident as part of a wider border security pattern near the war in Ukraine. The immediate question is whether the drone crossed NATO territory, threatened civilians, or fell near infrastructure, because each detail changes the diplomatic and military response. Romania's next steps could include summoning Russian officials, briefing NATO allies, releasing radar evidence, or tightening air defense patrols near the border. Viewers should watch for Defense Ministry evidence, NATO statements, debris photos, airspace notices, and any Russian response. Those records show whether this is another border incident or an escalation requiring alliance consultation. A dated defense briefing is the practical record that moves the story. A later defense report should identify the launch direction, radar track, debris site, and any allied consultation. That evidence will matter more than diplomatic accusation alone. The dated checkpoint for Story 9 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 9 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 9 Part 3 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. Israel is preparing to allow an international force into Gaza, according to Reuters and Israeli reporting that cite officials discussing the plan. The Times of Israel, regional outlets, and wire coverage frame it as a security and access proposal rather than an implemented deployment. The story matters because any force would need a mandate, participating countries, command rules, access routes, and coordination with Israeli authorities, Palestinian civilians, and aid groups. The next question is whether this becomes a written security arrangement or remains a political signal. Viewers should watch for cabinet decisions, UN or regional statements, named participating governments, humanitarian access rules, and a timeline for deployment. Those documents decide whether the proposal changes conditions on the ground. They also show whether the plan supports aid delivery or stalls over command and legitimacy. A later plan should name the force contributors, command structure, crossing points, and civilian protection rules. That is the record that turns a proposal into an operational change. The dated checkpoint for Story 10 Part 1 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 10 Part 2 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers can verify. The dated checkpoint for Story 10 Part 3 should identify the responsible office, the affected people, and the practical action viewers.